The Beginner's Guide is a game that I played not long after its release back in October of this year. I saw a few random mentions around Twitter and such lauding it as a powerfully affecting game and that designers, critics, and creatives alike should be taking in this masterwork. Obviously, these claims come into a bit of context with the playing of the game, but I was very excited to learn of the game's pedigree upon booting it up, it having been developed by Davey Wreden of the Stanley Parable fame. And while the Beginner's Guide is certainly as powerful as Stanley, its replayability is hampered greatly by its very nature. Like its forebearer apparent, Beginner's Guide is a walking simulator, or rather what I like to call a narrative immersion. While the Stanley Parable had a much wider playground for the player to explore, the Beginner's Guide is content to be very much a straight line, with ideas presented to the player rather than having the player explore and discover for themselves. There is perhaps more context at work here than in other such games, Wreden himself taking on the role of narrator. He makes it clear in the beginning of the game that he is simply going to be guiding us through a collection of independently created games that each encapsulate a singular idea or concept, and indeed tell the story of their creator, an acquaintance of Wreden's known by the assumed pseudonym Coda. Many critics, reviewers, and associates of mine have likened the game to reading an individual's journal or watching a slideshow of distilled emotional development, and while I do agree with all of these assessments, I found myself almost considering the game as the gaming equivalent to a found footage film. There is very little tapestry here. Wreden himself is a constant reminder that we are playing a game, that immersion isn't really the goal here, and there is a certain unrefined quality to each of the games that parallels rushed on-the-spot filmmaking to some degree. In this sense, I found myself more forgiving to the obsessively pointed and directed nature of the game. The personable narration adds its own element of interest, rather than simply relying on the power of its writing to entice the easily bored player. I do enjoy all types of games, but even though I hate the term walking simulator, I will admit that some of them can be quite dry. For instance, on their own, each individual chapter of the Beginner's Guide would be a bit humdrum, and possibly even uninteresting. But Wreden's pontifications and observations do allow for small amounts of attachment to build up over time. By the end of the game, I found myself in the kind of headspace that allowed and even demanded that I get into these games, as it were, as they were presented to me. Without saying too much, the Beginner's Guide remains intriguing and interesting right up until the end. The game can be crudely summed up as a discussion on the power of games as art versus entertainment and the power of both, but from the creator's perspective rather than the viewer's. The game has lots to say and there's lots to be said about the game, and obviously this video will seem a little stunted in that regard. I do know that some of my viewers will have already played the game, and perhaps others will genuinely not care about having things spoiled. So I have in fact produced a follow-up video to this one, wherein I attempt to go in depth into the deeper themes and interpretations the game may be providing, and I tell ya it's gonna be spoiler-tastic, so I do recommend playing the game first. I do really think that this game can and should be played by anybody, especially if they are an observer of the arts, gaming or otherwise. It's a bit pricey on Steam for the hour and a half that you'll spend with it, but if selling a game on message alone were warranted, walking simulator or not, I would say this game is completely worth it.